Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're tackling a really interesting piece of the future energy puzzle, stationary fuel cell systems.
Yes, definitely a hot topic.
We've got this detailed snapshot, the Global Stationary Fuel Cell Systems Market Report 2025, and, well, our goal is to pull out the key insights.
Figure out where things stand now and, where they might be going.
Exactly. Think of this as your shortcut, really, helping you understand the core of this market without getting totally swamped in data. Okay, let's dive in.
Absolutely. And what this report immediately highlights is a market with some serious momentum.
Okay.
Back in 2025, the global market, it was sitting at USD 400 and 370 million.
4.37 billion.
But the really fascinating part is the projection, climbing to USD 205.77 million by 2033.
Wow. Wait, that's nearly tripling in just, what, 8 years?
Yeah, it's a huge leap.
So to get from around 4 billion to over 12 billion, what kind of yearly growth are we actually talking about?
Well, the report calculates a compound annual growth rate, the CAGR, at 13.70% between 2025 and 2033.
13.7%. That's pretty robust.
It is. That kind of consistent growth really underscores this increasing global appetite for energy solutions that are efficient, yes, but also cleaner than, the old ways.
Right, because that push for cleaner energy, it isn't going anywhere, is it?
Not at all.
Now let's get a geographical sense of things. Where in the world is this tech really gaining the most traction right now, according to the report?
Okay, so currently North America leads the pack. They captured the biggest slice of global revenue back in 2025.
Okay, how much?
About 37%, which translates to a market size of USD 16.90 million then.
So over 1.6 billion in 2025. That's significant.
Definitely. And their projected CAGR through 2033 is still impressive, 12.1%.
12.1. Okay, so still strong growth, even from the lead position. Can we zoom in a bit on North America? Which countries are the main drivers there?
Sure. The U.S. is, the dominant player. No huge surprise there.
Right.
Their market was about USD 275.73 million in 2025, and they're looking at an 11.9% CAGR. Canada is also a strong contributor, around USD 194 million, but with a slightly higher growth rate projected, 12.9%.
Interesting.
And Mexico, it shows a lot of promise too, about USD 147 million market size in 2025, and a 12.6% CAGR expected.
Okay. So what's specifically driving this adoption in North America? Is it policies or certain industries needing it more?
It's really several interconnected things. Government incentives are key, definitely.
Like subsidies or tax breaks?
Exactly. And supportive hydrogen energy policies, particularly strong in the U.S. and Canada, those really help offset the initial costs.
Makes sense.
And then there's just this very strong focus region-wide on cutting carbon emissions. Plus, we're seeing more and more adoption in, critical infrastructure.
Oh, like what?
Data centers, for one. Healthcare facilities needing that reliable backup power. Telecommunications networks, too.
Right, places where the power absolutely cannot go out.
Precisely.
Okay, that gives a good picture of North America. How does Europe stack up?
Europe holds the second largest market share. In 2025, they accounted for roughly 30% of global revenue.
30%. Okay, so what does that look like in dollar terms?
That equates to about USD till 67.30 million. And their projected CGR from 2025 to 2033 is 12.7%.
12.7. So very similar growth trajectory to North America, just starting from a slightly smaller base.
Exactly. Very much in line.
Are there particular countries in Europe that are, leading the charge?
Absolutely. Germany is really at the forefront over there. Their market was about USD 250.93 million in 2025, with a projected CDR of 12.9%.
Okay, Germany's strong.
Yep. The UK is right behind, maybe slightly smaller market size at USD 212.91 million, but actually a slightly higher growth rate expected, 13.5%. Russia also represents a pretty significant market, nearly USD 200 million. And beyond those, you see quite a bit of activity in France, Italy, Spain, the Nordics.
So quite widespread across the continent.
It is, yeah. Each with their own specific growth forecasts. It's a diverse picture.
And the drivers in Europe, are they similar to North America, or are there different factors at play?
A bit different, perhaps more top-down in some ways.
Yeah.
Stringent carbon emission regulations from the EU are a major, major force.
Right, the regulatory push.
Definitely. And things like the EU Green Deal, their dedicated hydrogen strategy, these provide really clear direction and, crucially, significant financial backing for hydrogen and fuel cell tech.
So policy and funding aligning.
Exactly. Plus, you see serious investments going into building out the hydrogen infrastructure itself, production, distribution, all of that.
Okay, now let's pivot to Asia. We often hear about really dynamic growth there in all sorts of tech sectors. How does that translate to stationary fuel cells?
You're absolutely right to ask. Asia Pacific, or APAC, currently holds around 25% of the global market share.
25%.
Yeah, which was about USD 2048.8 million in 2025.
Wow.
But here's the kicker. It's the fastest growing region by a significant margin.
Oh, really? What's the growth rate?
The projected CAGR from 2025 to 2033 is a whopping 16.6%.
16.6%. Wow, okay, that is fast. Which countries in APAC are really pushing that number up?
China is the powerhouse, no question. Largest market there, USD 440.5 million in 2025, and still growing fast at 16.1% CAGR.
Big market, fast growth.
But India actually stands out with the highest projected growth rate globally.
Globally.
Yeah.
Higher than 16.6.
Yep, 18.5%. Now, it's starting from a smaller base, about USD 105 million in 2025, but that growth trajectory is just phenomenal.
18.5%. That's incredible. What about Japan and South Korea? They're usually big on this tech, too.
They are indeed. Both have substantial existing markets and strong growth projections as well, around 15% CAGR for Japan and nearly 16% for South Korea.
Yeah.
Australia, Singapore, Taiwan, Southeast Asia, they're all showing really strong growth too.
So that explosive growth across APAC, especially China and India,
Right.
what's the main reason? Why are fuel cells taking off so much there?
Well, a big factor is just rapid industrialization across much of the region.
Right, so more energy demand overall.
Exactly, a huge increase in energy demand. But at the same time, you have governments in many of these countries strongly promoting hydrogen and fuel cells. They see it as key to hitting carbon neutrality goals and tackling urban air quality issues.
So dual benefits. Energy supply and environmental goals.
Right. And just the sheer scale of new manufacturing, new infrastructure being built, it creates this immediate need for cleaner, reliable on-site power. Fuel cells fit that bill very well.
Okay, so we've covered the big three, North America, Europe, and APAC. What about the other regions mentioned in the report? South America, the Middle East, Africa.
Yeah, they have smaller shares currently, but definitely worth noting. South America accounts for about 4% of the global market.
4%, okay.
That was USD 166.06 million in 2025, and they're projected to grow at 14.4% CAGR. Brazil and Argentina are the main markets there.
14.4% is still pretty high growth.
It is. The Middle East also holds a similar 4% share, a bit larger in value at USD 174.80 million, and projected to grow even slightly faster at 15.1% CAGR.
15.1. And who leads there?
Saudi Arabia and the UAE are the key players.
Okay. And Africa?
Africa has the smallest current share, just over 2%, about USD 96 million in 2025. But again, solid projected growth at 14.0% CAGR. South Africa is the leading market on the continent.
So even though these regions are smaller players now, they're clearly showing significant upward potential. What's driving the growth in these, quite diverse areas?
It varies a bit. In South America, there's a growing focus on clean energy generally and more investment in decentralized power.
Right, moving away from just massive central grids.
Exactly. The Middle East, they're seeing rising demand for reliable power, sometimes off-grid, and also a strategic interest in hydrogen, potentially leveraging their existing energy infrastructure.
Interesting angle.
And in Africa, expanding electrification efforts are key, especially in remote areas. Plus, growing government support for renewables in general creates openings for fuel cells.
Okay, this global overview is really helpful. Now, the report also dives into the types of fuel cell technology being used, right? What does it say there?
Yes, it breaks that down. Currently, the report indicates that proton exchange membrane fuel cells, or PEMFCs, are the dominant type in the stationary market.
PEMFCs. Okay, why are they leading?
Mostly because they're highly efficient, they can start up relatively quickly, and they're pretty versatile. They work well for backup power, distributed energy.
Where would you typically find them?
You see them a lot in telecom towers, data centers needing that uninterrupted power, and also in smaller microgrid setups.
Okay, so PEMFCs are kind of the workhorse right now. Is there another type that's maybe catching up or growing faster?
Yes, definitely. Solid oxide fuel cells, SOFCs, are identified as the fastest growing segment.
SOFCs. Okay, what makes them stand out? Why the faster growth?
Well, they boast very high efficiency too, but a key advantage is their fuel flexibility.
Fuel flexibility, meaning?
They can run on pure hydrogen, sure, but also natural gas, even biogas. That's a big plus.
Yeah, that sounds useful in a transition period.
Exactly. And another major thing is their ability for cogeneration, or CHP, combined heat and power.
Ah, producing both electricity and usable heat.
Right. Which dramatically boosts their overall efficiency, especially in industrial settings where you can actually use that heat.
Hmm.
So they're really well suited for a larger scale power generation and industrial applications.
That fuel flexibility and the cogeneration aspect.
Ah, yeah.
Yeah, I can see why SOFCs would be growing fast. Now, the report also mentioned something about how they're built, stacking technology.
That's right. How you connect the individual cells to build up power is important. The report highlights two main approaches. Planar bipolar stacking is currently dominant.
Planar bipolar.
It offers high power density, good efficiency, it scales well. You find it widely used in both PEMFC and SOFC systems.
Got it. And the other approach.
The other one, which is the fastest growing segment in this category, is stacks with tubular cells.
Tubular cells, what's the advantage there?
Their main strengths are superior durability, better thermal stability, they handle heat really well, and potentially a longer operational lifespan.
Ah, so maybe better for tougher conditions.
Precisely. That makes them particularly good for high temperature industrial uses, mostly within SOFCs.
Okay, that makes sense. So we've looked at the regions, the types of cells, how they're stacked. Let's just quickly circle back to the big picture. We touched on some drivers, but can we summarize the main forces pushing this market forward, according to the report?
Absolutely. I mean, the fundamental driver, number one, is just that increasing global demand for energy that's both efficient and cleaner for the environment.
Can't argue with that one.
No. Supporting that, you have all these government incentives and policies popping up worldwide. They're actively encouraging hydrogen and fuel cells through funding, tax breaks, clear regulations.
The policy lever.
Right. And finally, there's the growing need, especially in critical infrastructure and commercial operations, for really reliable, clean backup power. That's a huge practical driver.
Okay, so lots of positive momentum. But surely there are challenges too. What does the report identify as the main obstacles or restraints?
Yes, it definitely points to some hurdles. High initial cost is still a big one. These systems aren't cheap up front.
Yeah, the sticker shock.
Exactly. Installation can also be complex, needing specialized know-how.
Right, not just plug and play.
Not yet, anyway. And then there's competition. Stationary fuel cells have to compete with other renewable options, like solar and wind, which are also getting cheaper and better, and sometimes have lower upfront costs, depending on the situation.
Okay, those are definitely real-world challenges. Looking ahead then, what are the key trends the report highlights? Where is the market really heading?
Well, one clear trend is increasing adoption in those critical infrastructure areas we mentioned, data centers, telecom networks, places where reliability is absolutely paramount.
Makes sense. Anywhere else?
There's also a strong push towards developing and deploying SOFCs more widely, especially for larger scale industrial power generation,
Right.
really leveraging that efficiency and fuel flexibility we talked about.
Right, scaling up the SOFCs.
Exactly.
And finally, the competitive landscape. Who are the big players driving innovation here? Does the report name names?
It does. It highlights several prominent companies, folks like Bloom Energy, Ballard Power Systems, Plug Power, Doosan Fuel Cell, Mitsubishi Power. These are seen as key innovators and market leaders.
The established names.
Right. They're investing heavily in R&D, forming strategic partnerships to push the tech forward and expand their reach.
Are there newer developments mentioned too?
Yeah, it also notes some interesting recent advancements,
Mhm.
like Group launching new high-power systems, Siltrax working on innovative silicon-based tech for bipolar plates, Proton Motor bringing out a new hydrogen fuel cell system, all within the last year or so.
So still a lot of innovation happening, even beyond the big players.
Definitely. It indicates a really vibrant and rapidly evolving competitive space.
Well, this has been a really thorough deep dive into the stationary fuel cell market, all based on this 2025 report. It's quite something to see the potential laid out and all the different forces at play.
It really is a dynamic field right now.
So just to wrap things up, we're clearly looking at a market poised for significant growth, yeah, driven by this global push for cleaner, more reliable energy.
Without a doubt.
But the growth isn't uniform. Different regions are moving at different speeds. Different technologies like PEMFC and SOFC have their own niches and growth rates.
Exactly. And it's that interplay, isn't it, between evolving policies, the continuous tech improvements, and balancing those drivers against the very real restraints like cost. That's what will shape the future here.
Absolutely. So considering this big projected growth and the advancements we're seeing, here's a final thought for you, our listener, to chew on. What specific role do you think stationary fuel cells will ultimately play in our future energy mix? And maybe more importantly, what further innovations are most critical to really accelerate their adoption into the mainstream? Good questions to ponder.
Indeed. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.